Okay, I'm going to break this drawing down into steps that are way easier to follow than you might imagine, so that you can have a go, create this, and amaze yourself. Okay, welcome to another tutorial. As explained in the intro, I'm going to break this down into steps so that you learn not only about the painting process and techniques, but also about the app that I'm using, Procreate. Now, that isn't to say that you couldn't use a different app on a different tablet and still follow along, but within the app Procreate and dimensions, I am going to use their default A4 canvas, which is 297 by 210 millimeters at 300 dpi. And in terms of the color profile, I will be using one of their default profiles, which is the sRGB code that ends in 2.1. In terms of the brushes, again, I'm only going to be using brushes that come free within the app Procreate, and I'll be using the soft brush within airbrushing, the medium hard brush within airbrushing. Within inking, I'm going to be using the Studio pen. Within elements, I might use a little bit of the clouds brush. Within luminance, I might use the light pen. And then within organic, I'm going to be using the rainforest brush, as well as the snow gum brush. And in terms of the colors, well, I've already pre-selected a suitable color palette here. And each of the colors has, if you go to this section where it says value, it has here a hexadecimal code for each color. And each of these codes are listed down in the video description. So you just need to copy them, paste them into this box and press enter. The color will appear up here, and then you can tap it together yourself into a color palette. Or next to the codes in the description is a link that takes you to my Patreon page where you can download the color file for free. It's also the place where you can gain access to exclusive content such as extended versions of these tutorials, for example. I'd like to say a massive thank you to those people who do support me over at Patreon. It really is appreciated, and it really does make a huge difference and allows me to carry on going with this channel. And with all of that said and done, we're going to get started. So the first thing I'm going to do on layer 1 is go to my colors, first color. I'm going to grab from the little circle, drag it into the canvas and release, and it flood fills the whole of that layer. Now, please be aware that the colors might shift slightly because of the camera and because of the high contrast that I'm using. I will lock it so that it's set at the beginning of the tutorial and so it doesn't fluctuate all over the place. But it does mean that the colors might be a little bit shifted, a little bit off looking compared to how they look on your screen. So the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go to my layers, I'm going to create a new layer, layer 2. And the first thing I'm going to do is go to the rainforest brush. I'm going to use the default version, so I've reset it. I'm going to go to my colors. I'm going to use the second color on the top row. I'm going to put the brush size at 10%, 100% opacity, and then just along that kind of top section, I'm going to create just some texture cutting through there. Now we're going to have some trees in that distant area, but we're going to have a lot of mist, a lot of atmospheric conditions, so I don't need to represent that too clearly. I'm just really after that top edge there. We don't need to worry too much about the bottom section, but I might as well just blot it in anyway. Then I'm going to go to the adjustments, the Gaussian blur, and I'm going to slide that across to blur that layer probably to about the 5%. Now, like I say, I really just wanted that top edge, so I'm actually also going to go to the smudge tool, set the smudge tool to the soft brush within airbrushing. I'm going to put it up to about 10%, 100% opacity, and then just back from that top edge, I'm going to smudge in any other textures that may be a little bit too apparent, like that. I'm also going to go to that layer, tap on the N, and I'm going to turn the opacity down to about 60%. And it really has made it super subtle now, and really a background element. I'm going to go back to my layers and create a new layer, layer 3. I'm still going to use the rainforest brush, but I'm going to go to the third color on the top row. I'm going to reduce it slightly down to 8%, still 100% opacity. And then I'm just going to build in some more texture that cuts across in a slightly lower area. And yeah, I can just do a few stripes of that, a few passes. And I might as well take it all the way down to the bottom of the canvas. I'm going to turn the size of the brush down to maybe about 4%. And I can just go in and just slightly reduce the extremeness of some of those gaps. Definitely want that kind of texture at the top edge, but I don't want the gaps to be really huge between the different sections. So that is a little bit more stable, a bit better. I'm going to go to the layer, tap on it and put on the alpha lock. And then I'm going to go to the fourth color on the top row. I'm still going to use the rainforest brush, but I'm going to tap on the brush and I'm going to change the spacing within stroke pad from 27 to 45% and click done. I'm going to reduce the size of that texture to the top end of 2% and also make it more subtle, maybe about 30% opacity. And then within the texture that we've just created, I'm going to be creating some sections where the light is just hitting it in a different way. Now, I want to create the sense that there's trees within layers of trees within layers of trees. So you might, for example, have that top edge, add some texture to that top tree, but then you might imagine there's another tree here as well. So you might just do another kind of top edge of a tree there. And then one up here, and then create a few layers of it like this. So there could be various layers of different kinds of trees, some small, some at the top edge there that are taller. And really, predominantly what we're doing is just creating a texture throughout that back area. It is going to be much more subtle compared to the foreground colors and details, but we don't want it to be completely flat. Flatness does look a bit strange when you've got detail and texture in the foreground. So we're just kind of creating something for the eye to rest on should it wander into that back area. Okay, so we have alpha lock on, but it doesn't stop us erasing. So we're going to go to the eraser, set the eraser to the airbrushing soft brush. Going to have it at around 10% size and 20% opacity. And I'm just going to start chipping away at this top edge. I want to soften it in. Do what you need to, just a few taps. Hopefully the taps don't sound too loud on microphone. I've just invested in a new microphone, so I've had a couple of challenges. The last couple of videos, the sound's been a little bit off in terms of having to place the microphone in a good place so that it doesn't detect the taps too loudly. Hopefully it's better this time. But I'm sure you will hear it a little bit, and I guess that's just the territory we're in with working on a iPad screen. So I'm just softening that top edge anyway. We've got atmosphere, just circle it in, soften that, reduce its impact so it's there but it's not too strong like that. Okay, so we're going to go to our layers again and create a brand new layer, layer 4. We're going to go to the airbrushing soft brush. Still going to be using the fourth color on the top row. Brush size at 3%, put it at 20% opacity. And maybe about a quarter of the way up, I'm going to draw a line across. Now, if you're not very good at straight lines, don't worry. When you get to the end, hold it and it will snap to a straight line. And also, don't worry if you can't judge whether it's horizontal. Just maybe put it at an angle where it's clearly not horizontal. Put your other finger down or a finger from your other hand, then release both, and you have created a perfectly horizontal line. We can then go to the adjustments, the Gaussian blur, and blur that in. Maybe to about the 15%, and it's really quite subtle. So what I'm going to do is maybe just slide and duplicate that layer, slide and duplicate it, slide and duplicate it, slide and duplicate it, and then I can take all of those versions of layer 4, pinch them together. So now it's on one layer. It has created some strange banding, which isn't a problem because we can further blur it in. So we'll go to the adjustments, the Gaussian blur. We'll blur it in a bit more again, just so it gets rid of that banding. About 7% will do for me. And then I'm going to go one more time in through that area, so maybe reduce it to 2%, keep it at the 20%, and just do a line. If you can judge it through there, hold it, and then we've created a little bit of a sharper edge there as well. Now I'm going to change brush on this layer. I'm going to go to the Elements Clouds brush, stay on the same color. I'm going to have it at around 15% size and about the 20% strength again. And I'm just going to circle in some of this color. over at the side. In fact, let's turn the opacity up. Let's be a bit bolder. Let's be 50% bold. And just do a few taps of this to create some more, slightly more vivid cloud kind of textures coming in at either side anyway. And down into this lower area too. And then just a slight blurring adjustments, Gaussian blur, and just blur it in maybe 4%. That should do. And that's got us a good way of the way towards setting the stage. I think I will go back to layer 3 and I will go back to my colors and go for the 6th color. Go to the soft brush with an airbrushing. Maybe put the size 15%. Let's go 15% strength as well. And just this bottom area, do a few passes right at the very bottom. Let's go over it a few times. A couple of times, nudge it slightly further up as well. But predominantly, we just want that color down at the very bottom. I just concentrate it almost off the edge of the canvas there, and it's going to ramp up that color in that area. And it just creates a slight difference here in the water than it does elsewhere. Okay, so we're going to go back to the layers. Go to the top layer and create a new layer from that. Layer 5. We're going to go to the airbrushing, medium hard brush this time. Back to our colors, and we'll use the next color along, the 7th color, which is quite dark. We're going to turn the size of the brush to 2%. We'll put it maybe at 90% opacity. And we just need to make a decision. We're going to do this really centrally. Sometimes with composition we can be more complicated, but I want to make this just a real center focal area. So I'm going to decide on the bottom where the tree and other details start. And we can always adjust it if we're not happy with our placement. So we're just being a little bit rough. I'm just having a hint of a curve, not quite that exaggerated, but just a hint. If we imagine looking at the island that the tree is going to be growing from above, it might have a circular shape. So we're just at a little bit of an angle where we see a hint that it's going to be like an ellipse. I suppose we can, well, we might as well start with that shape, I suppose, just to get that clear in our heads. And again, if you're not happy with the placement, go to the transform and you can pull it further down, you can nudge it left or right, wherever you feel that it needs to be. I'm going to then continue to add some maybe rocks, some shapes, some lumps initially that we don't really need to specify what they are. Now, I almost think that maybe it needs to be a little bit wider, so I'll go to the transform again, freeform, and just stretch it out. And that's easy enough to do. Deselect, go back in, and continue to maybe build in some objects. We don't need to know exactly what they're going to be at this stage. They're probably going to be a collection of rocks, tree roots, that kind of thing. Smaller shapes as we get down towards that edge of the water. And then I suppose up in this area, we'll have some bigger shapes. We're going to start having it becoming a tree. So I'm going to put that up to 4% size. And I can consider now getting in my tree trunk. Now, you don't have to follow exactly the tree shape that I'm going to create. It's only going to be there as a rough guide. Every branch, every detail, it's going to be impossible to follow along. Yours may end up being a little bit different, and that's absolutely fine. But I'm going to take the kind of larger shape of the tree trunk up, and we're going to have details here obscuring it anyway, so don't worry too much about that area. But then when it gets to a certain point, I'm going to have it splintering off into different sections. And then maybe lower down here, we can have another thick branch, and then maybe in the lower sections here, we can have the suggestion of beginnings of thick branches too. And again, much of this is going to be obscured, so don't worry too much. I'm going to turn that back down to maybe 2% again. And then maybe I could just get a general sense of the direction of that branch and then stop after a certain point. A general sort of direction. We don't need to go too far with this because we're going to change brush. That will make the job a little bit easier. So we only want to go so far. Once we get into the finer branches, this isn't really a suitable brush. And this is not a suitable brush because when you press lightly, you just get a lighter version and it doesn't change the width and the size of the brush with pressure. So Once we've got maybe so far, it's not a particularly attractive looking tree, and that's fine. We're going to go to a different brush. We're going to go to the inking studio pen, and then because it's pressure sensitive, we need to set the right size for it. So based on this canvas size, I think somewhere around the 20% size should do. Let's put it 100% opacity. And if you press on hard, you're going to get a thick line. And you press on light, you get a thinner line. So let's just think about where we're going to in terms of the whole canvas. I don't want to go to the very edge. I want there to be a healthy gap. Smaller gap maybe at the top, a healthy gap at the side. So maybe we could start at the side and start really fine branches, have some wiggles, wobbles, and then we could just sort of bring it in to connect to the branch that we've already got. Same here, fine. Press on more and have it join in equally. Press on slightly, bring it in, press on slightly, bring it in until it joins, and just create a series of branches. Create these interesting angles. I wouldn't recommend that you do too much of the kind of a wave. It's not very natural looking. I think branches tend to change direction in a slightly more angular way usually. You can get curves, but angles too. Maybe come to this area. A few angles joining in here, and obviously they can cut across each other. Now you don't need to draw every single branch at this stage. We can return to this and add more branches as we go. So I'm just going to create a rough sense of where I'm going to put things. I'm probably going to have the foliage of the tree quite dense anyway in most places. So you're likely only to see some of these branches poking through in some places. Okay, so that will do for my initial kind of frame that I'm going to add things to. I'm going to go back to my layers, back to layer 4, and create a new layer, which is now going to go underneath layer 5. So layer 6 is underneath layer 5. I'm going to change brushes again. I'm going to go to the organic snow gun brush. Now I'm just going to reset it initially, and then tap on it again. And I'm going to reduce the spacing within stroke path to none. And that just puts the little fine textures of that brush much closer together. And you can see that. I'm going to reduce the size of that brush to maybe 4% and 100% opacity. And then I'm just going to go in here, create some clumps. And it's quite a fine texture. And it's really going to create this sense of leaves and foliage in our tree. It is quite fine. And I'm kind of, that's the look I want to go for initially. We can always turn it further down too, sort of 3%. Now, one thing with this brush is you do need to press on a little bit. Keep going over the area, really kind of scribble it in. We could also try increasing the size, put it up to say 7%, and you can see you'll fill it in more quickly and you get some variation. So we'll try around with the different sizes. Let's stick with the 7%. Let's bulk it in initially, and then maybe we can refine some of the edges and the outline with the finer, smaller version of that brush. Now, I don't really want any light to be escaping through the top of that tree, and I also want to add some bulk to it, so I'm just going to really blot in some larger shapes up here. And I guess this is the point where we're really going to have to start defining the overall shape of our tree. And again, it doesn't have to be exactly the same as mine. It's going to be almost impossible to completely replicate every shape and every branch that I'm going to create anyway. So you need to decide what shapes are going to please your eye, what shape of tree exactly that you want to go for. We're just going to get some blocked in forms there initially, and you'll probably notice that I'm using a round movement with the brush, really kind of just scribbling it in. And this is very much a kind of background layer of foliage, which is why I've put it behind the tree branches. We're going to add some over the top that will obscure the tree branches, so it's a combination of different layers of foliage that creates a nice effect, I think. So we'll just push this a little bit further up at the top, maybe out in a couple of directions too. Let's check the overall composition, maybe just out towards the edges here a little bit. Then I'm going to reduce it back down to maybe the 4%. And just like I was saying before, be a bit more specific now on some of these edges. Control some of these shapes a little bit more, just scribble them in. Sometimes you don't need to go round in circles, just sort of wiggle it left and right, and it will kind of form these shapes a little bit more clearly. They're a bit tricky, a bit awkward to put in place with this brush, but I do like the texture of it, so it's worth sticking with, persevering with this brush. Now, I have considered making my own brushes for the tutorials, but I do generally just prefer the convenience of not requiring people to download brush sets, and just try to work with the brushes that come free with the app and just try and make them work to the task in hand. It's just the way I prefer to work. Now, these tutorials can take quite a while to follow along anyway. I don't really want people having to jump through hoops in order to just get started. So as long as you've got an up-to-date version of Procreate and you've got an iPad, you've copied the color codes, then you are good to go. Okay, so down in this lower area, just a few smaller blobs. I want to keep some of the gaps. I like the idea of the color and the light peeking through in places, but not everywhere. Let's keep it just in some places. We can always go back in with the eraser and remove some of this if we feel we want to anyway. I'm going to shut down a bit more of it, but I definitely want to keep some of it shining through. Okay, so once we've got so far, we've kind of defined the overall shape. I'm going to go to that layer, tap on it and put on the alpha lock. And then going to go to the first color on the middle row. And I'm going to change to the airbrushing soft brush. I'm going to put the brush size maybe about 6% and about 40% opacity. We can use this now to just affect it slightly. I feel like I probably should have gone in with more of a green color like this from the outset with the foliage anyway, but it's easily remedied with the alpha lock. Just a few passes with a soft brush, and this color just kind of addresses that and resolves that problem anyway, like so. I think that's a nicer background color. I think that works better. And I'm going to switch to the rainforest brush. We've still got the spacing within stroke path at 45%, so let's leave it like that. And with this third color, I'm going to reduce the size maybe to 2%, maybe 60% strength opacity. And even in this background area where it's more of a silhouette, I just want some shifts of color. So we're just going to add, pepper in some of this kind of texture in there, so we get some variation of color and variation of tone, even within the kind of further away areas where the contrast is going to be slightly less. We don't want it to be completely flat looking again, just like we had with the background. We need that subtlety of texture even in the furthest areas away. Like so. Now I'm going to go to that layer, tap on it and turn off the alpha lock, and then I'm going to go to the adjustments, the Gaussian blur. I'm just going to zoom in so you can see it more clearly, and just blur that in. And really, I don't want to blur it in too significantly, so maybe to the 2% should be sufficient, and deselect it. Just soften that texture a little bit. Okay, so once we've got the kind of background foliage sorted, we'll go to layer 5, click the plus layer. So now layer 7 is above and on top. We're going to go to the rainforest brush still. I'm going to put it at 2% size, 100% opacity, and we are going to use the third color along on the middle row. And now we're going to create some foliage that, well, just cuts in front of the branches in some areas. So I'm going to create like a cluster, a clump still, maybe a section there. maybe another section here, and then another one here, and just kind of connect in different kind of blobs, different clusters, until we're getting an overall sense of it kind of being almost like a round shape with various layers of texture. So these are going to obscure the branches in many places, which is really going to help the overall effect. We really don't want many of the branches to remain by the end, really. Be a little bit careful near the edges. We want to kind of roughly preserve some of the shapes we've already created. We can always go back in there and further refine them if we need to. We'll just be a little bit aware of them at least. We're getting a combination of texture now, so we've got the real fluffier, larger shapes of the rainforest brush, and then the snow gum brush. It's just got a finer, slightly more particular kind of quality to it. And I think that the two together work quite nicely. Okay, so you can deselect it, you can see when it's added, it's created a bit more depth on that tree already, and we haven't even added any highlight colours yet. So that is what we're about to do. We'll go back to our colours, and we'll move along to perhaps the fourth colour. We'll turn that size of the brush down to the smallest part of 2%, still at the 100% opacity, and well, we can just go in there and we can just add some stronger, warmer greens. Thinking about the top edge, we're probably going to have more light coming in from this side. So this side of the tree is going to catch the light more at the top edges. So again, we're just going to further layer this in. And probably most importantly is that we have gaps between this colour too. So we want to see the other greens still shining through. There's no point adding them initially if they're not going to still remain in some way. So don't go too wild with this. You want certainly to be adding plenty of it to build up an effect, but you also want some of the original colours still to shine through. And you can see the layering effect is really starting to work and really add a satisfying kind of look. And we've only really used, what, 3 types of green now anyway. And we have a fair few more going through to the yellow. Sometimes I create a range of colours and I don't use every single colour, but they're at least there to choose from, and that's very useful. So there'll be some over at this side with this green. This isn't the lightest green anyway. Just be a little bit more mindful. We don't want to do as much of it over here. So maybe just creep it in slightly more from the top and then more as it goes round. Now, tree textures, it does take a bit of time. Honestly, I love trees. I love all aspects of trees. So for me, this is a really fun thing to do. But it does take a little bit of time. So make sure you've got the time to devote to this and do a proper job of it. Don't rush it. Let's move along from the 4th to the 5th colour. It's only a hint lighter, but it is an important part of the layering. Just pepper some of that in there. Perhaps not too much of that because we're just going to fill it up with too much of this kind of middle tone. So maybe I need to jump ahead a few colours now. So we'll go to the 7th colour and let's trial that colour and see what that looks like. So I'm going to turn it down into the 1%, only just, and then we can just be a bit more careful now to build in some sharper details along this edge. And certainly when we get to the very edge, we're just going to make sure that pretty much the only colour along that leading edge is lighter colours, like this. Zoom out, check progress. Very important part of the process. I do say this a lot, but it's true. You don't keep zooming out to see how it looks with the rest of the image, then you're losing contact with the overall design. So it is an important part of it to keep zooming in and out. You'll see me do it quite a lot, so make sure you do too. Leave some gaps here where, for example, we're not going to have as much highlight, and we'll see some of the darkness showing through, the mid greens showing through. It's a super important part. Leave a substantial gap in places, come down to a lower area. It's catching the light as well. And it is also an exercise in being a little bit random, just sort of scattering around, not getting too uniform with this technique. And we haven't even got to the lightest of the colours yet, but we're heading in that direction, certainly. Now, this might be a little bit time consuming, but I don't think it's a difficult process to do. I suppose discerning exactly where to place it takes a little bit of practice, but it isn't that difficult to apply it. Just think about where the light source is going to be coming from, and obviously it's going to be touching the top edges, so you're roughly kind of creating that kind of a shape, series of shapes like this, but you won't see it quite as distinctly as that, but that's essentially what we're doing. So you don't want any shapes that are that way, obviously. What I find useful is to slightly squint or blur your eyesight while you're actually creating. I think if you keep your eyesight completely sharply focused, you lose the overall effect and you get lost in the individual sharpness of the detail. Whereas if you kind of blur your eyes a little bit and just try to take on board the whole scene, the whole image, then it gives you a better understanding of where perhaps you can place some detail and where it needs to go. I think having absolute clarity of focus while you're looking can be a bit of a distraction. You just want a general sense of how it's looking and then start to build it up from there. So I'm going over this edge again. I'm adding more of it on that very edge, but I am going to start building it in and around some other areas a little bit as well. And sure, it's time consuming, but unlike in other scenes, the tree is pretty much the image in this image. There's not very much to look at. So if we don't spend the time on the tree, then we're missing an opportunity to obviously make the focal point that interesting. So we just spend the time, make sure you're happy with the tree. Don't try and cut past this stage too abruptly, because if this doesn't work, if you haven't created a tree that you're really happy with, well then the rest of it isn't going to work quite how you would want, I imagine. We'll just perhaps create some sections that are reaching out on their own. Just with the lightest colour, we can redefine some of this edge a little bit. I'm almost done with this particular colour, and considering taking it even lighter. So what colour were we on then? We were on the 7th colour. Let's go for the 9th colour, almost at the very edge of the brightness. Same settings, so still at 1% size, 100% opacity. And then, yeah, I'm just going to ramp up the edge and this brightness. Maybe I'll retreat back a colour to the 8th colour. That was pretty bright, that colour, so I'm just, yeah, going back a little bit. Let's see what if we just slightly less extreme brightness brings to it. We definitely want to ramp up the brightness, but that was one of the brightest colours that I'd chosen, so just backwards a little bit. And sometimes you just have to trial these things and see what impact it makes. I feel like it was a little bit fierce, a little bit too strong, so we've gone backwards. We've retreated. And really, there isn't going to be a lot of the brighter colours over on this side. You can see a big difference now. Perhaps we could go back in with a cooler colour. In fact, we could even go to something like the, well, maybe not the fourth, maybe the third colour along on the top row. Turn the strength down though to maybe about 30. And well, we can just start subduing. Maybe put the size back up a little bit, 2%. And maybe the leaves over on this side have a different kind of highlight effect almost, reflecting some of the blue. And then maybe it kind of mixes somewhere in this area with the highlight and the blue together. And that's quite a nice kind of look and effect, I think. I think I might go back to layer 6. I might go back in still with that third colour on the top row, and I'm going to change to the airbrushing soft brush. Maybe 3% size, 20% opacity, and well, I might just consider subduing some of that back a little bit in places too. Maybe just in this area, for example. Not everywhere, just in 1 or 2 areas, just to push it back a little bit further. And that's perhaps quite effective too. Now, if we go back to layer 5 that had our branches on, we could perhaps go back in with the inking studio pen, and also back in with the, well, we did use the 7th colour, maybe the 8th colour, which is a slightly lighter version, and we'll set it at a 20% size, 100% opacity still, and then just from some of these branches, we can just set some other branches that are in there too, but they're not quite as vivid, quite as strong. A little bit more subdued. They're in there, still having an impact, but not quite as dark, possibly. And we're only going to really notice them a little bit lower down anyway, where it's actually lighter. Right, so we'll change back to the 7th colour, and I'm just going to go in there and refine some of these branches a little bit, get the placements of them right, and also we can work in and out through the canopy now and add layers of branches that are going to be visible through some of the gaps. So some bits of the branches have become obscured, but actually we can go back in and make some of them clearer than they were and add a bit more detail, flesh them out, make more of them. Okay, so I'm going to tap on layer 5 and put on the alpha lock. I'm going to go in with the airbrushing soft brush, back to my colours, and I am going to use the, well, maybe the 9th colour on the top row. Put it down to lowest part of 2% and 20% opacity. And then we also need to think that the branches are going to be subject to the same kind of light conditions. So maybe the top faces, the top edges of some of these branches are just going to catch the light in a different way. I'm just going to have a bit of a highlight on them in places. And just lightly go over some of them to knock them further back as well. And we can just change the overall look of some of these details. So maybe around the edges. And you can see that's just articulated that tree and those series of branches just a little bit more clearly, without really too much work. And then, like I say, just the top edge. So not the underside really of the branches. The underside is going to be relatively unaffected by the light. It's going to be the other sections that just catch the light in a different way. Not to say you can't go in there, maybe with a smaller size, 1%, and add some streaks, lines and stripes that run through, as a suggestion of kind of one section that overlays another, has bark even on it. Who knows? Okay, I'm going to create a new layer, layer 8, and we're going to work a little bit in refining maybe the bottom area here. Needn't take too long and take too much detail. We're going to go perhaps along to our colours. We're going to use the first colour on the bottom row. We're going to go with the medium hard brush, low on the 2% size, 20% opacity, and then just in these areas, maybe along the water's edge, we're just going to create a series of blobs. Perhaps I'll even turn that further down into the 1%. Create some textures, some small stones maybe. Doesn't need to be overly articulated and explained, just something there. Maybe some streaks. It kind of has a general sense of maybe a direction. Maybe the tops of stones, so a slightly round shape, just catching the light a little bit. Back to my colours, got this dark green. So I'm going to put the size of that up to 2%, put it up to 40% opacity. I'm just going to start building in some of this green in here as well. Then I'm going to move along, maybe to the third green, and I'm going to change brush. I'm going to go to the organic rainforest brush. I'm going to turn it down to 1%, put it on 30% opacity, and then I'm just going to start building in some more textures on this ground level. In fact, I'm going to put the opacity up to 50. Otherwise, we're not going to see it very much. Then I'm going to switch maybe to the fifth colour along this way more vibrant green. We're going to notice significantly more. And we're just getting almost like moss texture on top of stones, perhaps. And it is maybe a little bit too vibrant. So let's go back maybe to the third green on the middle row. And that's going to add a cooler element, certainly for around this edge, around this side. Seems more appropriate over here to have a cooler green, certainly. Let's put the brush size up to just into the 2%. And as we come around here, we can have a kind of blending of those different colours together anyway. And now we're going to be changing the scale up a little bit because we're going to be adding a little cabin here as a feature. Okay, I'm not going to do too much texture on that section just yet. I'm going to go back to the layer 7 and I'm just going to trial out a different technique for some more texture in here, because when you zoom in it doesn't look quite how I'd like it to look. So I'm going to first of all slide and duplicate that layer, and I'm going to go to the adjustments. I'm going to go to noise, and I'm going to turn the scale up to about 40%. Leave the other settings as they are. But then I'm going to slide it across, and well, you can see it with none, and you can see it if you go too far. We don't want to turn it up too much, so we've got a percentage here. You can just slide it across until we start to add more noise and more texture, more sense of a grain in there, so it doesn't look flat anywhere. And really, it doesn't take much in terms of percentage, maybe 6. You can zoom in and out just to check all the different areas. I think about 6% actually benefits the texture, makes it look a little richer, a bit more complex in places, and you can simply compare the before and after, the before and then the after, and you get to choose whether you like that effect or not. I do like it. I actually think it adds just a nicer texture there overall. Another feature I'm going to change slightly, if we just zoom out, I'm going to go back to layer 3 that had most of the background sort of texture of trees and details. I'm going to tap on that layer and I'm going to go to the adjustments, the hue, saturation and brightness. I'm going to turn the brightness of it down from 50 to maybe 48, and it just starts to make some of these more apparent again. I feel like they just got a little bit lost in the composition. Okay, we're going to move into this area and we're going to create our cabin, which is our focal point, I suppose. Now I want to keep it quite simple. I don't want to get overly detailed, but we are going to create another layer for it. I'm going to go to the medium hard brush. I'm going to go to the 10th colour on the bottom row. 2% size, 100% opacity on the medium hard brush within airbrushing. And just very roughly press on. Draw a very rough rectangle and hold it. And as long as it straightens to a 4-sided shape that is extremely roughly rectangular, tap on the little arrow up here and change it to a rectangle. Press on the screen to deselect, and then I'm going to drag the colour into that box to fill it in. and then transform, hold it from the bottom corner to pull it out, and the same from this one to pull it in, and try to get those lines to be roughly kind of parallel with each other, and deselect. Grab it again, and we can move it around, and if we need to shorten it, pull it around. Now it won't distort it because you're not long holding it on the corner, but we just want to get it into a position where we think it would suit. I think maybe somewhere around there, maybe a little bit shorter that way. I think that will do. I'm then going to tap on that layer and put on the alpha lock. I'm then going to go to the eraser and set the eraser to the medium hard brush as well. 2% size, in fact no 1% size, 100% opacity. I'm going to go for the central kind of area, but maybe just off to the right a little bit. Do a little point, and then I'm going to do a line down, maybe to about there, hold it, so it snaps to a straight line, and then down there, hold it, snaps to a straight line. You can move it around just to get it just so. A little bit shorter on this end than that end, for example, is what I'm looking for, and then just remove that bit of the triangle. I don't care about the little bit I've accidentally done there. We're going for a very rough look on this anyway. Back to my brushes. The medium hard brush is fine. I'm going to go for the first colour on the bottom row, down to 1% size and maybe 25% strength. And starting from the bottom, I'm just going to tap in a dashed kind of edge at the bottom there. A few dashes, and it will create a better effect. And then I'm going to leave a small gap and do another one. And if they mush together in places and it's not completely neat, then do you know what? For this kind of look, it's not going to be too terrible if that's the case. Try and keep it roughly neat, so to speak. Do your best. But it doesn't need to be 100% perfect, just a decent rough job of lines that go across. Now if that's something you're going to struggle with, then I guess you can always get a grid up or something. But try and eyeball it. I think you'll get a nicer, more organic look to this that way anyway. And if they're a little bit wavy, do you know what? It adds to the rustic charm of our cabin anyway. So one of the reasons I'm pretty easygoing about the neatness of this is because that's the kind of look that we're going for. So they're fine to mush together. We don't want it to be overly neat. The wavy lines actually work to our favor to a point, as long as, you know, it generally looks kind of right. And that's fine. I'm okay with the imperfection of that. Next, I'm going to go to the layer, turn off the alpha lock, go back to the eraser, and just on our edge, just make it less perfect as well. Nibble away at that edge a little bit. Same with this edge. Create a slightly rougher look, and that will work better. Could even do that along the top to a point, not too much, like so. Maybe even along some of these edges here. Zoom out and you can see the impact of that. It's a small detail when you zoom out anyway. I'm going to go back to layer 8, create a new layer, layer 11, but now it's underneath layer 10. I'm going to go back in with the 10th colour, back in with the medium hard brush, maybe 2% size, 100% opacity, and well, I'm just going to set in the rest of the shape of our cabin. It's a bit of a quirky shape to this. It doesn't go all the way up to the very edge. Just create a bit of a straight line that goes down here. Again, you can hold it and to snap it into a straight line if you struggle. Same for this side. And then just kind of have it fade into the tree areas. Just put it up a bit, blot it in. Down again. Control where it meets the other elements. Perhaps we could put it to 2% size and 15% opacity and just go over this area. So it's almost got a shadow that it's creating anyway. Go over that a few times, just soften that edge in. And we'll come back to it. Stay on the same layer. I'm going to go to the 7th colour on the bottom row. Stick with the medium hard brush. Put it down to 1% size, 20% opacity strength. And I'm just going to do a line here, and a line here. Again, pretty rough. Turn it down again, low on the 1%. Just do a little bit of an edge that cuts in here and here, just to kind of fuse it together a little bit. Maybe then we can just, within that, create another line so you get like a split look to this. Maybe another one. And we could use that colour, maybe go back to layer 10 and, well, we can perhaps just have it as an influence, a colour, so it's not quite so completely disconnected. We can introduce some of that colour up into the sections up here as well. Just move along some of these panels, these planks, or the roof. Just dirty the colour of that up a little bit. I'm going to go to the adjustments, the liquify on the push and put it down to 15% size, pressure on max, and I'm just going to push some of these up so it kind of joins at this bit. And so it looks now like that juts out quite effectively. Don't really need to do much on this side, maybe just a hint of it, and you can see it's created quite a nice effect there. Deselect. Go back to layer 10. We need a bit of detail here, but not, again, too much. I'm going to go in with the 9th colour on the top row, still with the medium hard brush, high on the 1%, but low on the strength, so maybe about 15% strength. And I'm just going to create some centre planks on this side, not too many. And then we're going to shift. Once we get to an edge, we're going to go to a warm colour, so the 7th colour again. And then we're going to create some slightly bigger panels. And then we'll just scribble them in. Maybe we should put the brush size up into the just at the top end of 1%. We want to do these next to each other, going up and down. Again, maybe we should put this up even further, just into the 2%. Hold it so it snaps. Do another one next to it, and maybe this is the way that you'd prefer to work, and that's absolutely fine. Don't care if the gaps are a little bit varied in places, it's fine. We want very much a rustic look here. There is no perfection to this. You can do this all the way across. Maybe increase the size even higher on the 2%. Hold. I think that what I would like to do is go in with the eraser. Actually, no, we'll go to the medium hard brush with the 10th colour and we'll just clip that off, maybe 100% strength on the 2% size, and just cut across there. Hold it so it snaps to a straight line. Just reduce the size of the actual cabin. So we're just dealing with this area now. And we'll go from that layer, we'll create a new layer, layer 12. We'll stay with the medium hard brush, turn it down to 1%, 100% size, and we'll go in with this 10th colour. And, well, I'm just going to create another rectangle. It could be quite small. Hold it, similar to what we did before. Go up here, tap it to a rectangle. And then we can just decide where we're going to put it. I'm just going to put it so it almost lines up with the roof itself. Maybe increase the size. Go to the transform, change it however you want it to be. And, well, I'm going to just simply duplicate the layer, transform and move the other one across this side as well. And I'm judging the kind of gap here to the gap over here. You get to decide where to put things though. First one. Just try and line it up. Maybe it's gone a little bit skew with, and that's fine. We can just change that up, rotate it until it looks straighter. Then I guess we're going to have a door. So I'm just going to take one of those, duplicate it again, rotate it on its side, move it into the central area, maybe pinch it together a bit, put it here. That will do initially. Then in those rectangles, lower on the 1%, 100% opacity. I'm just going to divide them up. Again, pretty rough. Not taking a huge amount of care with this because when you zoom out, it's only a small detail anyway. and I'm okay with it being pretty rustic. That is the overall look we're going for. Divide that one in half. Then I'm going to take those 3 layers, just pinch them together, merge them together. Bit tricky. There you go. Layer 12 has all the window frames now. I'm going to go back to layer 10. I'm going to go to the luminance, light pen, and I'm going to go for the, actually no, we'll go for the 8th color. 30% size, 25% strength. Well, I'm just going to initially fill in the sections of these windows. So somebody's home, keeping nice and warm with maybe a wood fire, a log fire burning. Zoom out when we're starting to get that effect, but we've definitely gone to ramp this up, so I can go over it a few times. Tap lightly. If you want to be more precise, let's turn it down 10%. Tap that in. Colour in these squares. Keep them separate. Again, we can go over these as much as we feel we want to. It's underneath our frame, our wonky looking window frames, and that's fine. Again, when you zoom out, it's such a small part of it, and it's fine. Okay, so I'm going to go back up to layer 12, create a layer above that now. And I'm going to do pretty much the same thing again, but this is going to obviously bleach out the window. So I'm going to turn the size of the brush up, this time to 60%, but down to about 10% strength. I'm just going to go over that area a little bit. Just kind of bring out a glow in the immediate area around the window. Over it here as well. And here. Put it up, maybe 100%. Maybe building a glow in that area generally. And that window and that one. Then I'm going to put it back down again to be really controlled again. 10% size, 50% strength this time. And I'm just going to really be much more precise. It's almost like the place is on fire, but no. It's just to create that really cozy glow and really bring your eye to focus on that detail. I think without having the strong light, then we're not going to notice the window and the little cabin as much. Just a hint of it in the edges of these windows too. I think that's working. I'm going to switch to the airbrushing medium hard brush again. Probably go back a colour, so the 7th colour, not the 8th. Higher on the 1% size, maybe 20% strength. And well, I'm just going to bring out some of these panels, these planks a little bit more clearly as well. I don't want them to be completely lost. And then, well, we've got an overhang from the roof, and the roof is on a layer up here. We've got a layer here, so I'm going to go in with a darker colour, maybe the 10th colour again. Put it to 2% size, 30% strength, and, well, I'm just going to go in there and create a bit of a shadow from this bit that juts out, and just generally under here to contrast nicely with the light. I think that it helps to create that sense of darkness in there as well. A nice location, but maybe we should have a little kind of veranda that just goes around it. We can hint at it anyway. So go to our top layer, create a new layer on top, just in case it goes wrong, and we'll go in with the medium hard brush and we'll go for something lighter, probably the 1st colour on the bottom row. 1% size, 30% opacity, and I'm just going to create a line across here. Go over it a few times. Again, it doesn't have to be exactly neat. Then I'm going to go for the 7th colour, turn it down even smaller, do a little line underneath that. Again, doesn't have to be perfect. Then I'm going to change to maybe the 9th colour, top row. And we're just going to change angle a little bit. And then I'm going to create like a banister. Something that's going to stop people from falling off if they were a little bit tipsy of an evening. Perhaps we need a darker colour for the front. We'll go back to the 10th colour on the bottom row. And that's a bit thick, that line, so let's turn it even lower down on the 1%. Still on 30% strength, but I'm just going to bring a line of that across. Go over it a bit more. Again, if you struggle with lines, well, we can do the whole hold it down until it goes to a snaps to a straight line like that. And I think that works. Just shore it up a little bit with some darker shadows as well. Maybe go for the 6 color. Just add some lighter touches in and amongst this area. Go for the 7th color. Bring out some posts. Just giving it a bit of strength. Doesn't need to be overly laboured on as a detail. It's just a little bit of tweaking, refinement. So when you do zoom out, it's like you get a hint of it, and that's actually enough. I'm going to go to the layer 8 and create a new layer, and I'm going to go to the organic rainforest brush with that 10th layer on the bottom row, 1% size, 100% opacity, and I'm just going to create some foliage that sits in and around our little cabin. So it's the similar kind of tone, same darkness. We can bring it down into the lower area underneath as well. Just scribble it in. Bring it down to create the nice shadows that would go underneath it. Then around the side here, perhaps. I suppose up here we could perhaps have a chimney, so we'll go up to the very top layer again, just for the fine detail. Just set it down from the top a little bit and just go up. I'm really not intending to do anything overly elaborate. Back in with the grey at the bottom. Lightly just create a little bit of a feature up here, and then maybe back in with the 7th colour, the brown. I don't know. It's just hinting at it, and it's such a minor detail, you don't need to overly deliberate on that at all. A touch more refinement to match the level of detail for this area down here. We may also stay on this top layer 14. We may also go with the medium hard brush. Go for perhaps a colour up here. So go for the 6 colour, 1% size, 20% strength. And, well, maybe just define some of these edges. Make them a little bit sharper. And obviously we've got a light here, so maybe we could just show its impact a little bit in this central area too. The glow. And that's quite a nice feature. Perhaps even go up a colour to go for the 7th colour on the middle row. Just a couple of touches of that. Not too much. Maybe go back to the, well, let's go for the 6th colour on the bottom row. And then similarly, we can just create some clarity of stones along the water's edge here a little bit. I don't really feel inclined to go into too much detail, and just a touch more clarity. Some highlights. Take away from some of that rough edge. I think that works better, and certainly when we're zoomed out, that's sufficient. I might just go back to the roof. I'm going to go in with the medium hard brush and perhaps this light colour, so the 6th colour. 1% size, 20% strength. I feel like I could just lighten up some of this. In fact, I'm going to turn that really low on the 1%. I want this cabin to be a little bit more noticeable when we are zoomed out, so why not just push the highlights of this roof a little bit more, break it up, add more texture. Good opportunity just to go over it, and this going over it with a real patchiness, it's just going to add so much character to it as well. You zoom out, it really just lifts that, and I just think it's really nice. Just go into that edge. It's facing where the light is going to be, so just a bit more along that edge too. Small details, but they do make a difference. Zoom out. Yeah, happy with that, definitely. Maybe a little bit on this section here as well, this little balcony veranda. thing. So I'm happy with that overall image. I'm going to now, and only do this when you're ready, I'm going to go to all the layers that have all of that detail on, and we're really talking a lot of layers. So from layers 6 to 14, I'm going to pinch them all together. I'm going to tap on that layer. I'm going to copy it, and then I'm going to backtrack it. So 2 fingers back until you see a little notification that it's undo merge layers, and they're all back again. But the really cool thing is we've still got the copied image. So 3 fingers swipe down and paste. And you can't see it very clearly there, but if you go here, we've got an actual image here. If we put it to the very top, that is the whole of that image. And if we go to transform, you can pinch it in. It's the whole of that image condensed down to 1 layer, or the whole of the tree information anyway. So 2 fingers back to get it back where it should be. I'm going to go and flip it vertically, go to the freeform, pinch it together so it squashes it a little bit, and then I'm going to drag it down. In fact, we'll squash it down even further. Then I'm going to squash it or bring it down here so it is now going to be the reflection, like that. I'm then going to take it, drag it so it's underneath all of our tree layers, so underneath layer 6. And then we're going to go to the adjustments, the motion blur, and we're going to the side, move that not too significantly, maybe about 15% initially. Then I'm going to go to the selection, freehand, and just grab not quite all of it, but certainly this bottom section. So I'm going to leave out this bit and not blur that anymore. Adjustments, motion blur, and again to the side, maybe 20% this time, deselect everything. You can see it's kept that a bit clearer and that bit a bit more blurred out. Perhaps I'll also go to the Gaussian blur and just blur that in even a bit more. I think that works better at about 5%. I'm also going to go to that layer. I'm going to tap on the N and just dial it back a little bit. I want it to be not quite as vivid. So maybe about 90%. And that already now has subdued it. Then I'm going to go to the eraser and I'm going to set the eraser to a medium hard brush, why not? 2% size, or only just about 30% strength. And I'm just going to bring in some lines that cut in. I'll zoom in a little bit, you'll see they cut in and disrupt and chip away at that edge. Like this. And then we do the same over at this side as well. Then we can go to the smudge, medium hard brush again, 1%, 100% strength, and I can just further push either direction. All the way across. That's further, really just blending in that kind of water's edge effect. I think this bottom area perhaps just needs to be subdued, so I'm going to go in the eraser, the soft brush with an airbrushing, 5% size, 20% strength, opacity, and I'm just going to, I just feel like we need to reduce the greens that are in there and just generally get rid of some of that, make it much less vivid and clear in that bottom section, and I think that's working a lot better. I might even go to that layer, the adjustments, hue, saturation and brightness, desaturate it down to about 45%, and so we just shifted some of the colour out of it as well. And then back to my top layer just for fine tuning, soft brush, maybe the second colour on the top row, 1% size, 10% opacity, and we'll just have some streaks coming in here as well, joining there. Nothing too over the top, just so that gives a bit of clarity where we've got the island kicking in there as well. Stay on the top layer. I'm going to go in with the airbrushing soft brush, set it quite big, maybe 20%, 10% opacity, and I'm going to go for the second colour on the top row, and I'm just going to soften in maybe the top edge of this just to give the whole look just a little bit more of a misty appearance, especially as it kind of goes round at that edge. It's going to be slightly more subject to the atmosphere in the scene generally, so just to subdue it slightly, I think that works better. And then maybe in this top corner we'll go for the 5th colour, put the size of that up even further to 50% size on the soft brush, 10% strength, and just tap a few times in this corner to bring a nice glow in. And I think I'm going to leave this tutorial here at this point. I hope you've enjoyed following along. Please do hit subscribe, give the video a thumbs up if you've enjoyed. You may also like a new venture that myself and Joel Crate have ventured out into. We've decided to create a podcast, and each episode releases on a Tuesday. And if you're interested in hearing us talk about all things art, then there is a link for that down in the video description too. Otherwise, I hope to catch you back here soon. Thanks so much for watching. Bye for now.